Every generation swears it has learned from history, and every generation proves that it hasn't. In 1945, the world gathered in Nuremberg, Germany, to put its monsters on trial. Standing before the tribunal was Robert H. Jackson, a sitting justice of the U.S. Supreme Court and the chief American prosecutor for the Allies. He told the court, "The wrongs we seek to condemn here were so calculated, so malignant, that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored." Those words were carved into humanity's consciousness. From them came Nuremberg Principle Number 4. Following orders is no defense. It was the birth of a new idea, that every individual is not inside a system of power, carries personal responsibility and culpability for what the system does. From the soldier who fires, to the clerk who stamps, to the minister who signs, each one answers to history. But bureaucracy has a genius for erasing fingerprints. The Nazi regime didn't run on devils alone. Neither does the Trump administration, by the way. It ran on memos. The Reich Main Security Office merged police, intelligence, and record-keeping into one administrative engine. Sound familiar? Every deportation had a form. Every death train had a schedule. The Holocaust, as documented by Yad Vashem's archives, was executed with bureaucratic precision. When the war ended, those same officials faced the judges and said, "We were only doing our jobs." That excuse became the anthem of every empire that loses its soul. Decades later, political theorist Hannah Arendt, a German Jewish refugee who fled the Nazis and built her life teaching in the United States, covered the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem. She looked at this gray bureaucrat, the man who organized the trains to the camps, and coined a phrase that still cuts through time: the banality of evil. Evil, she said, often looks like paperwork done on time. At Nuremberg, entire corporations were tried too. IG Farben, Krupp, Siemens, industrial giants that had profited from forced labor. Executives served short sentences. The companies, they returned, they rebranded, and they rebuilt. Justice punished individuals, but preserved the structure that allowed them to thrive. It was the first modern lesson in power prosecuting people while protecting itself. And as those trials ended, a different kind of deal was being struck in the United States. Through a secret U.S. Army program later known as Operation Paperclip, about 1,600 German scientists and engineers, including many former Nazi party members, were flown to the United States. And their expertise, in quotation marks, was redirected from the V-2 rocket to NASA's Saturn V. Their crimes were completely forgotten in the name of the Cold War. It was the first great moral trait of the modern age, justice exchanged for advantage. The archives of the U.S. National Archives, Record Group 330, confirm every name, every clearance. We called it progress, but it was really pragmatism with amnesia. And while those scientists were unpacking their boxes, living free in America without consequence in American laboratories, a teenage girl named Anne Frank was already gone, dead, murdered in Bergen-Belsen at the young age of 15. Her diary, written in hiding between the years 1942 and 1944, became one of the most read documents of the Holocaust, a record of innocence against brutality. And now, as we sit here listening to this 80 years later, parts of the United States are still trying to silence her. According to the American Library Association and PEN America, school boards in red states, Republican-run states like Texas and Florida, have removed or restricted versions of the Diary of Anne Frank during curriculum disputes. Think about that irony. The same nation that helped prosecute Nazi censorship now shelves the words of an innocent murdered Jewish child. At the same time, Reports from Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International show that major social media companies like Meta, X, and TikTok routinely restrict or downrank posts critical of government policies in ongoing war conflicts. And as the Anti-Defamation League and other researchers track record spikes in both anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim hate crimes, both in LGBTQIA plus crimes and in minority or female hate crimes, the picture becomes painfully clear. Power protects power by keeping the rest of us divided. They don't care which side you're on, as long as you're fighting someone else instead of them. This is the continuity of empire. Bureaucrats, contractors, politicians, profiteers, oligarchs, elites, each insisting they're just doing their jobs while the moral center collapses. This is the architecture of obedience. It stretches from the train stations in Germany of 1942 to the detention centers or alligator Alcatraz of 2025. It's why the promise of never again keeps failing, because the paperwork always gets filed and the orders always get followed. Let's walk into present day, into ICE facilities, into border camps, and then cross the ocean to a place where drones and blockades repeat the same logic of obedience, because the machinery never really stopped, it just changed its logo. This is the liberal conservative. Stay with me. When we say never again, we picture the past, but the machinery of obedience didn't vanish after 1945. Not at all. It reemerged under fluorescent lights and government seals. In the United States, it carries a three-letter name, ICE, Immigration and Custom Enforcement. Created in 2003 under the Department of Homeland Security, ICE was born from fear, the promise to prevent another 9/11, by turning immigration into a national security mission. 2 decades later, it manages an archipelago of detention centers across the country. According to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, dozens of detainees have died in ICE custody since 2011, and dozens is probably way undercounted for. Many from treatable conditions, by the way. The ACLU and Physicians for Human Rights documented women at the Irwin County Detention Center in Georgia who reported coerced hysterectomies in 2020. Imagine a state that was normally red, that has GOP members that are fighting abortion laws, but they are forcing hysterectomies? A 2021 report from the Justice Department Inspector General confirmed that family separation policies traumatized thousands of children, describing them as a failure of coordination and oversight. No one has been criminally charged. Every file is labeled policy. That's the same bureaucratic shield Arendt warned about. Violence translated into procedure. And abroad, the same vocabulary of security and deterrence echoes through drone strikes and checkpoints. In Gaza, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported that by mid-2025, more than 100,000 Palestinians were killed or missing. Since the 2023 escalation, with over 1.5 million Palestinians displaced. UNICEF called it a war on children. The International Criminal Court has applied for arrest warrants for leaders of both Hamas and Israel on allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Whether the court proceeds or not, the evidence exists: aerial imagery, hospital records, endless lists of names. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International describe the campaign as collective punishment, a term drawn from the Geneva Conventions. Israel's own human rights organization, B'Tselem, calls it a moral and legal disaster. In Washington, the debate remains political. In Gaza, it remains mortal. This isn't about one border or one flag. It's about the global normalization of cruelty when governments outsource conscience to policy memos and algorithms. When ICE officers say we're following procedure, when soldiers say we're following orders, and when citizens say nothing, history records all three in the same handwriting. The world once built tribunals to stop this kind of pattern, but justice without jurisdiction is only theater. The question now is whether any of us, inside or outside these systems, will choose disobedience when obedience means complicity. Let's trace how power protects itself, how corporations, contractors, and politicians keep immunity while the powerless carry the blame. What does real accountability look like, and what could it look like in our lifetime? Every empire learns the same trick, how to move guilt up the ladder until it disappears. After the Second World War, a handful of industrialists went into prison, but the companies that armed the Reich returned to business. IG Farben split into BASF, Bayer, and Hoist. They became pillars of post-war reconstruction, their profits flowing again within a decade. It was proof that the global economy has amnesia when capital is useful. In 1942, the new West German government signed the Luxembourg Agreement, paying roughly 3 billion Dutch marks in reparations to Israel and to Holocaust survivors. That money mattered, but justice is never a wire transfer. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, programs like Operation Paperclip had already absorbed Nazi engineers into America's military and American life, free and clear. The Cold War needed rockets more than morals. As the U.S. National Archives later confirmed, those 1,600 German scientists were quietly granted citizenship and paychecks. Power had learned how to recycle itself. Today, the pattern is corporate rather than colonial. Private prison company list detention contracts as revenue streams in their SEC filings. Defense manufacturers post quarterly gains whenever a new conflict ignites. Lobbyists write legislation, and campaign donors call it democracy. According to Open Secrets 2024, the top 5 defense firms spent over $70 million on U.S. lobbying last year, an investment that yields billions in government contracts. That's not ideology. That's just arithmetic. And when abuses surface, when migrants die in custody or civilians die under bombs, boards of directors issue statements of concern while stock prices barely tremble. Accountability stops where profitability begins. But history has its own math. Eventually, the human cost outweighs the ledger. The Rome Statute of 1998, which created the International Criminal Court, tried to codify that idea. No one is above the law. Its Articles 25 and 28 defined individual responsibility, even for heads of state and commanders. Yet enforcement still depends on politics, not principle. Some nations sign, others veto, and the victims wait. If justice is selective, it isn't justice, it's theater. And the audience? Well, that's us. We keep watching the same play, different actors, same ending. Wars marketed as security, borders marketed as safety, economies marketed as freedom. The script never changes because the sponsors never die. They never change. But there is another tradition, the one that refuses to obey. It lives in whistleblowers, real journalists, medics, doctors, soldiers who say no. It lives in every one of us who refuse to trade truth for comfort. That disobedience is the real inheritance of Nuremberg. So what does accountability look like now? Well, it starts where you are. It's refusing to look away from cages. It's your own country or bombs paid for by your own taxes. It's reading the banned books. It's teaching them to your children and your grandchildren. It's listening to censored voices, supporting the reporters who still risk their entire lives and everything they know to document what power denies. Because truth is not neutral. It's the weapon of the powerless. Anne Frank once wrote, "How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." She didn't get that moment, but you know who does? We do. Thank you for listening to The Liberal Conservative. I'm your host, and until next time, stay awake, stay sovereign, and stay loud.